Grandma, I need to tell you about Maya Washington because her story is about to break my heart wide open. And I know you always said that the broken places are where the light gets in. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October, Maya stood alone in the pristine hallway of the Cambridge Mathematics Institute, her cleaning cart casting long shadows under the fluorescent lights. She paused outside Professor Daniel Corleone's office, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her master key. Through the frosted glass door, she could see the amber glow of his desk lamp still burning. He'd been in there for 3 days straight, Grandma. 3 days without sleeping, barely eating, muttering equations under his breath like prayers to a god who'd stopped listening. The other professors whispered that he was losing his mind, trying to solve the Hartwell Conjecture, a mathematical puzzle that had stumped the world's greatest minds for over a century. Maya pushed open the door and froze. Professor Corleone was slumped over his desk, unconscious, his graying hair matted with sweat. Scattered across every surface were hundreds of pages covered in numbers, symbols, and desperate scratches of ink. The whiteboard that covered an entire wall was a chaos of equations, some crossed out so violently the markers had torn through the surface. But it wasn't the sight of the exhausted professor that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. It was the equation staring back at her from the whiteboard. Elegant, complex, and somehow wrong. Just wrong, in a way that made her chest tighten with a familiar ache. Grandma, you know how you always told me that some people are born with gifts they don't even know they have? Maya Washington had been cleaning offices at night and hiding her light under a bushel for 37 years. But standing there in that moment, looking at those numbers, something inside her broke open like a dam. She set down her spray bottle with shaking hands and approached the whiteboard. Let me tell you about Maya, Grandma, because I think you would have loved her fierce, quiet strength. Maya Washington had been invisible for most of her life, and she'd learned to prefer it that way. At 37, she moved through the halls of Cambridge Mathematics Institute like a ghost, arriving at 10 p.m. when the professors and graduate students had gone home, cleaning their offices, emptying their wastebaskets filled with crumpled, failed theorems, and leaving before dawn broke over the ivy-covered buildings. She'd grown up in Detroit, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress who'd scraped together every penny to keep their family fed. When Maya had shown unusual aptitude for numbers in elementary school, her teacher had recommended her for accelerated programs. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Her father's injury, her mother's illness, the need to work to help support her younger siblings. College became a distant dream, then a forgotten one. But Grandma, here's the thing you would have understood better than anyone. Maya never stopped learning. While she cleaned offices, she read the textbooks left open on desks. While she emptied trash cans, she smoothed out discarded calculations and studied them at home by lamplight. While the world slept, Maya taught herself calculus, topology, and advanced mathematical theory with a hunger that kept her awake until sunrise. She'd been working at the Institute for 8 years, invisible to the professors who discussed their research around her as if she were part of the furniture. They never saw her pause to read their work, never noticed when she quietly corrected a small error in their calculations by erasing and rewriting a single number before moving on. Maya had learned to be careful with her intelligence, Grandma. Growing up black and poor had taught her that being too smart, too curious, too visible could bring unwanted attention. So she kept her head down, did her job, and fed her mind in secret. But some secrets, as you always said, are too big to stay buried forever. Standing there in Professor Corleone's office that night, Maya felt 37 years of hidden brilliance pressing against her chest like a caged bird desperate to fly.
The Hartwell Conjecture stared back at her from the whiteboard. 11 lines of complex mathematical notation that represented a problem so difficult it had defeated Fields Medal winners and Nobel laureates. Maya pulled out her phone and took a picture of the equation, not because she planned on doing anything with it, but because something deep in her soul recognized it like an old song. She finished cleaning the office in silence, her mind already working through the problem as she dusted the bookshelves and emptied the wastebasket. When she finally locked the door behind her and continued down the hall, the equation followed her like a melody she couldn't shake. Grandma, if anyone listening to this has ever felt like they had something important locked away inside them, something the world told them wasn't meant for people like them, I hope they'll share their story in the comments, because Maya's journey is just beginning. The next morning, Maya sat in her small apartment kitchen with a cup of coffee growing cold beside her notebook. She'd been awake since 4 a.m., working through the Hartwell Conjecture with a focus that scared her. Because, Grandma, she could see it. She could see where every other mathematician had made the same fundamental error.
They were approaching the problem like architects trying to build a house from the roof down. But Maya, with her years of watching from the shadows, could see that the foundation itself was flawed. The conjecture wasn't unsolvable because it was too complex. It was unsolvable because everyone was starting from the wrong assumption. Her phone rang, startling her from her calculations. It was her supervisor at the institute. "Maya, we need you to come in early today." Jessica McDonald's voice was tight with stress. Professor Corleone was hospitalized this morning. Exhaustion and dehydration. His office is a disaster, and we have the departmental review board visiting tomorrow. Can you work some magic on that space? Maya's heart clenched. Is he going to be okay? The doctors say he'll recover, but Maya, Jessica paused. He's been working on some impossible math problem for months. The other faculty are worried he's having a breakdown. The pressure to solve it has consumed him. After hanging up, Maya stared at her notebook. Her handwriting filled 12 pages, working through approaches that felt as natural as breathing. She'd identified the error that had stumped the world's greatest minds, and she could see 3 possible paths to the solution. But she was Maya Washington, night custodian, not Dr. Washington, professor of mathematics. "Grandma, you always told me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the right thing even when your hands are shaking." As Maya walked to work that evening, her notebook tucked deep in her bag, her hands were definitely shaking. The institute buzzed with unusual energy. Graduate students huddled in corners, whispering about Professor Corleone's collapse. Department heads paced the halls, making urgent phone calls about the review board's visit. The prestigious Hartwell Prize, worth $2 million and certain academic immortality, seemed more impossible than ever. Maya made her way to Professor Corleone's office. The department secretary had left a note. "Please organize everything. Box up the mathematical work separately. We'll need to preserve it for his recovery." But as Maya began carefully collecting the scattered papers, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Professor Corleone hadn't just been close to solving the conjecture, he'd been close to making a catastrophic error that would set the field back years. His exhaustion had led him down a path that felt right, but was mathematically devastating. She could fix it. In her notebook, she'd already mapped out the correction. Maya found herself standing at the whiteboard with an eraser in her hand, staring at months of Professor Corleone's desperate work. The building was empty except for security. No one would ever know. But Grandma, as she lifted that eraser, Maya thought about something you might have asked her. Was she trying to hide her light to protect others, or was she hiding it to protect herself? The eraser trembled in her grip. Maya didn't erase the board that night. Instead, she took detailed photographs of every equation, every crossed-out attempt, every desperate scrawl in the margins. She worked until dawn, carefully organizing Professor Corleone's papers while her own solution burned in her notebook like a secret too dangerous to tell. 3 days later, the departmental review board arrived, 5 of the most prominent mathematicians in the country, there to evaluate the institute's research programs and decide on funding that would determine the careers of dozens of professors and graduate students. Maya watched from the shadows as they filed into the conference room, their faces grave with the importance of their task. She knew their names from the academic journals she read in her spare time. Dr. Ellen Ripley from Harvard, Dr. Jack Sparrow from Yale, Dr. Sarah Connor from MIT. Mathematical royalty, every one of them. The buzz around the institute was electric with anxiety. Without Professor Corleone's breakthrough on the Hartwell Conjecture, the department's most ambitious research project had stalled. The review board would certainly notice. Careers hung in the balance. That evening, as Maya cleaned the conference room where the board was staying, she overheard a conversation that made her blood turn to ice. "Daniel's hospitalization is unfortunate, but frankly, I'm not surprised," Dr. Ripley's voice carried through the partially open door. "The Hartwell Conjecture has broken better mathematicians than him. Perhaps it's time this department focused on more achievable research goals." The funding implications are significant. Without a major breakthrough, we're looking at budget cuts that could eliminate entire programs. This institute has been living on reputation rather than results. Maya's cleaning cloth stilled in her hands. She thought about Professor Corleone lying in the hospital, defeated by a problem she could solve. She thought about the graduate students she'd watched work 18-hour days, brilliant young minds who might lose their funding. She thought about the janitor's notebook hidden in her locker, filled with mathematical insights that could change everything. But most of all, Grandma, she thought about you, about the times you'd told her that gifts weren't meant to be hoarded, that light hidden under a bushel served no one.
The next morning, Maya did something that terrified her. She called in sick to work and went to the hospital to visit Professor Corleone. She found him in a private room, staring out the window with the hollow eyes of a man who'd lost his life's purpose. When she knocked gently on the doorframe, he looked up with confusion. "Maya, what are you doing here?" I brought you something." Her voice was barely a whisper as she pulled out her notebook. "I think I might be able to help with your research." Professor Corleone's expression shifted from confusion to polite concern. "Maya, I appreciate the thought, but mathematical research isn't something you can just—" She opened the notebook to the first page of her work on the Hartwell Conjecture. The words died in his throat. For 10 minutes, he read in complete silence, his eyes growing wider with each page. Maya stood frozen by his bedside, watching a man's entire worldview reshape itself in real time. "Where did you learn this notation?" His voice was hoarse. "I taught myself. From textbooks, from papers I found." She gestured helplessly. "I know it probably looks wrong, but I think the foundational assumption everyone's been using is, it's not wrong." Professor Corleone looked up at her with something approaching awe. "Maya, this approach is revolutionary. You've identified the flaw that's been staring us in the face for decades." Grandma, if anyone out there has ever had a moment when someone finally saw them, really saw them for who they truly were, I hope they understand what Maya felt in that hospital room. Like 37 years of holding her breath and finally being allowed to exhale.
Professor, Maya's voice shook. The review board is making their decision today. Your department, your students, they're going to lose everything if someone doesn't solve this. Professor Corleone sat up straighter in his hospital bed, his illness forgotten. Maya, what you've shown me here, it's not just a solution, it's a complete paradigm shift. But even if we could present this to the board, they would never accept it coming from... He stopped himself, but they both knew what he'd been about to say. From the cleaning lady, Maya finished quietly. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths about genius and recognition, about who gets to be brilliant in a world that has already decided what brilliance looks like. That's when Maya made the decision that would change everything. Professor, Maya said, her voice growing steady with resolve, what if we could present it together? Professor Corleone stared at her, processing the implications. Maya, you don't understand. The review board, they're not going to listen to a custodian, no matter how brilliant your insights. Academia doesn't work that way. Then we don't tell them I'm a custodian, Maya replied, the words tumbling out before she could lose her courage. Your office has visitor logs, guest researcher applications. What if I was a visiting scholar you'd been collaborating with via email for months? Someone who's been working on this problem independently. Grandma, I wish you could have seen the look that passed between them in that moment. Two people recognizing that they were about to attempt something that could save careers or destroy them both. Even if we could pull off that deception, you'd need to present the work yourself, defend it, answer questions from some of the most brilliant mathematical minds in the country. Are you prepared for that? Maya thought about the 8 years she'd spent invisible in those halls, listening to lectures through open classroom doors, reading discarded research papers, teaching herself advanced mathematics by the glow of her phone screen during break times. She thought about the countless nights she'd solved problems in her head while mopping floors, her mind working through theorems while her hands worked through routine. I've been preparing for this my entire life, she said quietly. I just didn't know it. 2 hours later, Maya sat in her apartment, transformed. She'd bought a simple but professional dress, styled her hair, and practiced her presentation in the mirror until her voice stopped shaking. Professor Corleone had made the calls from his hospital bed, spinning a careful story about a brilliant independent researcher he'd been collaborating with via email for months. The review board had agreed to hear their presentation at 4 p.m. Maya arrived at the institute through the front entrance for the first time in 8 years. The receptionist she'd never spoken to smiled politely and handed her a visitor badge marked Dr. Maya Washington, guest researcher. For a moment, Maya stared at the badge. Dr. Washington, the title she'd never earned, but somehow in this moment felt more real than any degree. She made her way to the conference room where the review board was waiting. Through the glass walls, she could see them, 5 of the most influential mathematicians in the country, sitting around the polished table where she'd wiped down surfaces and emptied trash cans hundreds of times.
When Dr. Jessica McDonald, her supervisor, passed by in the hallway and did a double take, for a heart-stopping moment, Maya thought she'd been recognized. But Jessica just smiled and nodded politely at the well-dressed stranger, never connecting her to the invisible woman who'd cleaned her office every night for 8 years. Maya took a deep breath and pushed open the conference room door. "Gentlemen, Dr. Ripley," she said, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised even her. "I'm Dr. Maya Washington. I believe Professor Corleone told you I might have some insights on the Hartwell Conjecture." Dr. Ripley looked up from her notes with polite skepticism. "Yes, though I have to say, Dr. Washington, we weren't able to find much information about your academic background. Which institution are you affiliated with? Maya had prepared for this question, but her heart still hammered as she answered, I'm an independent researcher. I've been working on applications of advanced topology to number theory for several years now. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been working on exactly that, just not in the way they assumed. Well, Dr. Sparrow said, leaning back in his chair, we're always interested in fresh perspectives, though I should warn you, the Hartwell Conjecture has stumped some of the finest minds in mathematics for over a century. What makes you think you've found something we've missed? Maya walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. Grandma, in that moment, she thought of every time you'd told her that her mind was a gift, every night you'd found her reading by flashlight under the covers, every conversation where you'd encouraged her to dream bigger than the world seemed to let her. The problem, Maya said, beginning to write, isn't that the conjecture is too complex. The problem is that everyone has been starting from the wrong foundation. For the next 45 minutes, Maya transformed that conference room into her classroom. She worked through the mathematical reasoning with an elegance and clarity that left the review board speechless. She explained not just what the solution was, but why every previous attempt had failed, and how her approach opened up entirely new fields of mathematical research. When she finished, the room was dead silent. Dr. Sarah Connor was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Washington, this is extraordinary. You haven't just solved the conjecture, you've revolutionized our understanding of the underlying mathematical structures. Maya's hands were shaking as she set down the marker, but her voice remained steady. Thank you. I hope this demonstrates the kind of innovative research that Cambridge Mathematics Institute is capable of supporting. That's when Dr. Ripley asked the question that made Maya's blood freeze. Dr. Washington, this is groundbreaking work. We'd very much like to see your previous publications on related topics. Could you provide us with a complete CV and publication list? Grandma, Maya stood there, at that whiteboard, surrounded by the most important mathematicians in the country, having just solved one of the world's most famous mathematical problems, and she realized that her greatest achievement was also about to become her greatest exposure. She had 30 seconds to figure out how to answer a question that would either launch her into academic stardom or destroy everything she just accomplished. The silence stretched like an eternity. Maya's mouth went dry as 5 pairs of expectant eyes waited for her response. In that moment, she could feel the weight of 8 years of invisibility pressing down on her, along with 37 years of being told that people like her didn't get to be brilliant in rooms like this. My publication record is... She started, then stopped. The lie she was about to tell felt like swallowing glass. I've been working primarily on theoretical foundations. Most of my work hasn't been published yet. Dr. Sparrow's eyebrows rose. Dr. Washington, surely someone with insights this profound has contributed to the academic literature. Even preliminary papers, conference presentations. Maya's heart pounded so hard she could have been certain they could hear it. I've been selective about where I submit my work. The atmosphere in the room shifted. She could see doubt creeping into their expressions, the professional skepticism that mathematicians wore like armor when something didn't add up. Dr. Ripley leaned forward. Dr. Washington, I don't want to seem intrusive, but your approach to this problem is so fundamentally different from anything we've seen that we're naturally curious about how you developed these insights. What's your educational background? Where did you complete your doctoral studies? The question hung in the air like a blade. Maya felt the walls of the conference room closing in, felt the weight of every assumption she'd allowed them to make, every half-truth that had brought her to this moment. Grandma, Standing there, Maya thought about all the stories you used to tell me about people who tried to be something they weren't, and how the truth always found a way to surface. She thought about the graduate students whose funding depended on this research, about Professor Corleone lying in a hospital bed, about the janitor's cart sitting in the supply closet with her real badge hanging on the side. She could lie, create a fictional university, a made-up dissertation, an imaginary academic career. She'd already come so far down this path that a few more deceptions might carry her through. Or she could tell the truth and watch everything she'd just accomplished crumble to dust. My educational background is unconventional, Maya said slowly. Dr. Connor tilted her head. Unconventional how? Before Maya could answer, the conference room door opened and Jessica McDonald walked in with a clipboard and an apologetic smile. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she recognized Maya. "Wait, Maya? What are you doing here?" The blood drained from Maya's face. Around the table, 5 of the most prominent mathematicians in the country looked back and forth between Jessica and Maya with growing confusion. "I'm sorry," Dr. Ripley said. "Do you two know each other?" Jessica looked completely baffled. "Know each other? Maya works here. She's part of our custodial staff. She cleans this very room every night." She turned to Maya with concern. "Maya, what's going on? Why are you dressed like— Why are they calling you doctor?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maya watched as understanding dawned on the faces around the table. The polite interest transformed to shock, then skepticism, then something that looked uncomfortably like betrayal. "You're a janitor," Dr. Sparrow said, his voice flat with disbelief. "A custodian," Maya corrected quietly, though she knew the distinction meant nothing in this moment. Dr. Ripley stood up from the table, her expression hard. Ms. Washington, are you telling us that you've been impersonating an academic researcher? That everything you've just presented is some kind of elaborate hoax?" "No," Maya's voice cracked. "The mathematics is real. Everything I showed you, every equation, every proof, it's all valid. I solved the Hartwell Conjecture. The fact that I'm a custodian doesn't change the truth of the mathematics." "But it changes everything else," Dr. Connor said, her voice cold with professional disappointment. "You've lied to us about your credentials, your background, your entire identity. How can we trust anything you've presented?" Maya felt the room spinning around her. 8 years of hidden genius, 37 years of buried dreams, and 45 minutes of pure mathematical brilliance were collapsing under the weight of who she was supposed to be versus who she actually was. Grandma, in that moment, Maya felt something inside her break that she wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Not her spirit, that had been tested too many times to break easily, but her faith in the idea that brilliance could overcome the barriers the world built around people like her. "I understand," Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the devastation inside her. "I'll go." She walked toward the door, leaving behind the whiteboard covered with revolutionary mathematics, leaving behind the solution to a 100-year-old puzzle, leaving behind the only moment in her life when she'd been seen for what she truly was. As she reached for the door handle, Dr. Connor's voice stopped her. "Ms. Washington, wait." Maya turned, hope flickering in her chest. "Your work," Dr. Connor said slowly, "even if we can't officially recognize it coming from you, would you be willing to allow Professor Corleone to publish it under his name? To let him present it as his breakthrough? At least then the mathematical contribution wouldn't be lost." Maya stared at her, processing the offer.
They wanted her genius, but not her name, her breakthrough, but not her recognition, her solution to save their careers, but not her place at their table. Grandma, Maya thought about every story you ever told me about people who gave away pieces of themselves to make others comfortable, and how those pieces never grew back the same way.
"No," Maya said, her voice stronger than she felt. "No, I won't do that." She walked out of the conference room, past Jessica McDonald's stunned face, past the receptionist who'd given her the visitor's badge that now felt like a cruel joke. She walked through the front entrance of the Institute for the last time, knowing that when she returned that evening, it would be through the service entrance, with her cleaning cart and her invisible status restored. The solution to the Hartwell Conjecture walked out with her, tucked away in a notebook that the mathematical world would never see again. Maya sat in her car in the Institute parking lot for 2 hours after the meeting, too numb to drive home. The October sun was setting behind the ivy-covered buildings, casting long shadows across the campus where she had spent 8 years being invisible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Professor Corleone. "How did it go? The nurses say you were brilliant." Maya stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain that brilliance without credentials was just delusion? That genius in the wrong skin was treated like fraud. Instead, she drove to the hospital. She found Professor Corleone sitting up in bed, his eyes bright with anticipation. The moment he saw her face, his expression fell. "Maya, what happened?" She told him everything. About Jessica's recognition, about the review board's reaction, about their offer to let him claim her work. As she spoke, she watched something die in his eyes, not disappointment in her, but disappointment in a system he'd served faithfully for 30 years. "They asked you to give me credit for your work," he said, when she finished, his voice flat with disgust. "Yes. And you refused." "Yes." Professor Corleone was quiet for a long moment, staring out the hospital window at the campus where Maya would return to mopping floors tomorrow night. "Maya," he said finally, "what if there was another way? Professor, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but—" "No, listen to me." He sat up straighter, his voice gaining strength. "What if we could document everything, your process, your insights, your mathematical reasoning? What if we could create a complete record of how you solved the conjecture and then release it publicly, not through academic channels, but directly to the mathematical community online?" Maya frowned. "They'll just say I'm a fraud trying to steal credit from real mathematicians." "Some will, but Maya, mathematics isn't just about publication in prestigious journals. It's about truth. And the truth has a way of forcing recognition, even from people who don't want to give it." Over the next 3 hours, Professor Corleone helped Maya create something unprecedented, a complete video documentation of her solution to the Hartwell Conjecture. Using his laptop and the hospital's Wi-Fi, they recorded Maya working through every step of her proof, explaining not just the mathematics, but her thought process, her insights, the moments of breakthrough that had eluded researchers for over a century. "Maya," Professor Corleone said as they uploaded the final video, "you're about to do something that's never been done before. You're going to bypass the entire academic establishment and present groundbreaking mathematics directly to the world. It's revolutionary." "It's terrifying," Maya corrected. "The best revolutions usually are." They uploaded the video series to several platforms simultaneously with a simple title, The Hartwell Conjecture, solved by Maya Washington, independent researcher. Professor Corleone insisted on adding his own introduction, vouching for Maya's mathematical insights and taking full responsibility for the collaboration. He said, "I won't let them dismiss this as a hoax. My reputation is going to stand behind yours." Within 6 hours, the videos had been shared across mathematical forums, social media platforms, and academic networks. Within 12 hours, they'd been viewed by thousands of mathematicians worldwide. Grandma, Maya sat in her apartment the next morning watching the view counter climb and reading comments from mathematical minds she'd only dreamed of engaging with. Some were skeptical, some were suspicious, but many were in awe. "This is the most elegant proof I've seen in 20 years," wrote Dr. Alan Turing from Oxford. "The insights in Part 3 are revolutionary. This opens up new fields of research," commented Dr. Marie Curie from the Sorbonne. "I don't care if she's a custodian, a CEO, or a circus performer. This is brilliant mathematics," posted Dr. Albert Einstein from Princeton. By the second day, major mathematical journals were reaching out to Maya directly, requesting to publish her work. By the third day, universities were offering her honorary positions and research opportunities. But it was the fourth day that changed everything. Maya was cleaning the conference room where she'd been exposed 3 days earlier when Dr. Ripley walked in. Maya's hand stilled on her cleaning cloth as they made eye contact. "Miss Washington," Dr. Ripley said quietly. Maya straightened, preparing for another confrontation. "Dr. Ripley, I watched your videos." Maya said nothing, waiting. "They're extraordinary, more than extraordinary. They're paradigm-shifting. I owe you an apology." Maya blinked in surprise. "Pardon me?" Dr. Ripley sat down at the conference table, looking suddenly older than her 55 years. "Miss Washington, I've spent my entire career in academic mathematics. I've published over 100 papers, won awards, served on review boards like this one, and in all that time, I've never seen anything as purely brilliant as what you accomplished." "Then why?" "Because I was scared," Dr. Ripley interrupted. "Because you challenged everything I thought I knew about how genius works, about who gets to be brilliant, about the systems I've spent my life defending. It was easier to dismiss you for your deception than to confront my own assumptions about who belongs in our field." Maya leaned against her cleaning cart, processing this unexpected admission. "The mathematical community is talking about you, Miss Washington. Your work has already been verified by dozens of independent researchers. The proof is airtight, revolutionary, and absolutely correct. You didn't just solve the Hartwell conjecture. You opened up new areas of mathematical research that will keep us busy for decades." Dr. Ripley stood up, extending her hand to Maya. "On behalf of this review board and the Cambridge Mathematics Institute, I'd like to offer you a formal position as a research fellow. Full salary, benefits, and institutional support to continue your mathematical research."
Maya stared at the offered handshake, thinking of all the nights she'd dreamed of this moment, all the years she'd taught herself advanced mathematics in secret, all the time she'd wondered if her mind was a gift worth sharing with the world. Grandma, if anyone out there is listening to this and has ever felt like their dreams were too big, too impossible, too different from what the world expected from someone like them, I hope they know that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply refuse to stay hidden. Maya reached out and shook Dr. Ripley's hand. "I accept," she said. 6 months later, Maya stood at the podium of the International Congress of Mathematicians in Berlin, looking out at an audience of 3,000 of the world's most brilliant mathematical minds. She wore a simple blue dress and the confidence of someone who had finally fully stepped into her own light. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast auditorium, "when I solved the Hartwell conjecture, I thought I was just answering a mathematical question that had puzzled researchers for over a century. What I discovered was something much more profound. That genius has no prerequisites, that brilliance recognizes no boundaries,
and that the most revolutionary insights often come from the places we least expect to find them. The audience was completely silent, hanging on her every word. I spent 8 years cleaning the offices of mathematicians who never saw me, never spoke to me, never imagined that the woman emptying their trash cans was also solving problems in her head that they couldn't crack on their whiteboards. I learned topology from discarded textbooks, mastered calculus from crumpled homework assignments, and developed my mathematical intuition by studying the failed attempts of brilliant minds who were generous enough to leave their work where I could see it. Maya paused, her eyes finding Professor Corleone in the front row. He was back to full health now, and his smile was radiant with pride. But this story isn't just about me. It's about every custodian, every service worker, every person whose intelligence is overlooked because of their job title or their background. It's about recognizing that mathematical genius isn't the exclusive property of those who can afford prestigious educations or who fit the traditional image of what a mathematician looks like. She clicked to her first slide, showing the revolutionary applications of her proof that had already led to breakthroughs in quantum computing, cryptography, and theoretical physics. The mathematics I'm about to share with you didn't emerge from isolation or individual brilliance. It emerged from 8 years of observing, learning, and building on the work of hundreds of mathematicians who unknowingly became my teachers. Every equation on this board represents not just my insights, but the collective knowledge of a community that I was privileged to learn from, even if they didn't know they were teaching me. For the next 2 hours, Maya presented mathematical research that would reshape multiple fields of study. She introduced the Washington theorem, named not by her choice, but by the international mathematical community that had embraced her work. She demonstrated applications of her proof that opened doorways to solving other century-old problems. She answered questions from Nobel laureates with the same grace she once used to clean their offices. But Grandma, the moment that broke me happened during the question and answer session. Dr. Heinrich Müller from the Max Planck Institute stood up, his voice carrying the weight of Germany's mathematical tradition. Dr. Washington, your proof is undeniably brilliant, but I must ask, how do we know that someone without formal mathematical training can truly understand the implications of what they've discovered? How do we verify the rigor of work done outside traditional academic oversight? The auditorium went dead quiet. Maya had been expecting this question for months, had practiced her answer 1,000 times, but standing there facing the embodiment of mathematical gatekeeping, she decided to give them something more than a practiced response. Dr. Müller, Maya said, stepping away from the podium and walking to the center of the stage, let me tell you what I learned cleaning offices for 8 years that no formal education could have taught me. She gestured to the massive screen behind her, where her proof was displayed in elegant mathematical notation. I learned that brilliance often looks like failure before it looks like success. Every night, I emptied trash cans full of crumpled papers, attempts by brilliant minds who were inches away from breakthroughs they couldn't see. I learned that the most elegant solutions often come not from adding complexity, but from stripping away the assumptions that blind us to simple truths. I learned that mathematics isn't about titles or degrees or institutional approval. It's about seeing patterns, understanding relationships, and finding beauty in the logic that governs our universe. And most importantly, I learned that genius isn't the exclusive property of those who can afford to pursue it in traditional ways. She looked directly at Dr. Müller. You ask how we can verify the rigor of work done outside academic oversight. The answer is simple, the same way we verify any mathematical work. We check the logic, we test the applications, we attempt to disprove the conclusions. And if the mathematics stands up to scrutiny, as mine has, by hundreds of independent researchers over the past 6 months, then it doesn't matter if it was solved by a professor at Harvard or a custodian at Cambridge.
The applause started slowly, with a few people in the front rows, then spread like wildfire through the auditorium until 3,000 mathematicians were on their feet, giving Maya an ovation that lasted for 5 full minutes. Dr. Mueller, to his credit, was among those applauding. After the presentation, Maya was surrounded by researchers wanting to collaborate, universities offering positions, and media representatives eager to tell her story. But through the crowd, she spotted a familiar face that made her heart skip. Professor Corleone pushed through the throng, his eyes bright with tears of pride. "Maya," he said, pulling her into a fierce hug, "you did it. You didn't just solve the conjecture, you changed everything." "We did it," Maya corrected. "You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." "No," Professor Corleone shook his head. "You did this. I just helped you find the courage to show the world what was already inside you." That evening, at the conference gala, Maya received the International Prize for Mathematical Innovation, the youngest person and the first without formal academic credentials ever to receive the honor. As she stood at the podium holding the Crystal Award, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. "This award doesn't belong to me alone," Maya said into the microphone, her voice carrying across the elegant ballroom filled with the mathematical elite. "It belongs to every person who has ever felt that their mind was too big for the box the world tried to put them in. It belongs to every custodian, every service worker, every person whose intelligence is invisible to those around them." She held up the Crystal Award, letting it catch the light from the chandeliers above. "But most of all, this belongs to the woman who taught me that brilliance isn't about where you come from. It's about where you're brave enough to go." Grandma, in that moment, standing in front of the greatest mathematical minds in the world, Maya Washington finally understood what you'd been trying to tell her all those years, that her gifts weren't a burden to hide, but a light meant to illuminate the path for others. 1 year later, Maya walked through the halls of the newly renamed Washington Institute for Mathematical Innovation. The building where she'd once pushed a cleaning cart now bore her name in bronze leaves above the entrance. The institute had been transformed into a center for non-traditional mathematical education, welcoming brilliant minds from all backgrounds, all circumstances, all walks of life. Professor Corleone, now serving as Maya's research partner and the institute's co-director, greeted her in the lobby with his morning smile. "Ready for the big day?" he asked. Maya nodded, smoothing her hands over the simple blue dress she'd chosen for the occasion. Today marked the first graduation ceremony for the Institute's inaugural class. 12 students who had come to mathematics through unconventional paths, former mechanics, artists, retail workers, and yes, one former custodian, all of whom had demonstrated extraordinary mathematical aptitude when given the chance. "Professor," Maya said as they walked toward the auditorium, "do you ever think about how different things would have been if I'd accepted their offer, if I'd let you take credit for the proof?" Professor Corleone stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maya, if you'd done that, you would have saved my career and probably several others, but you would have perpetuated a system that keeps brilliant minds hidden in the shadows. By refusing, by insisting on being seen for who you really are, you forced the entire mathematical community to confront its own biases." They paused outside the auditorium, where they could hear the excited chatter of families gathering to watch their loved ones graduate.
Maya took her place at the podium, looking out at faces that reflected the beautiful diversity of human intelligence. "When I was 8 years old," Maya began, "my grandmother told me that every person is born with gifts, but not everyone gets the chance to unwrap them. She said that the saddest thing in the world wasn't failing to be brilliant. It was never getting the opportunity to discover the brilliance that was already inside you."
The audience was completely still, parents and students hanging on her words. Today, 12 remarkable individuals are graduating from a program that exists because we believe brilliance has no prerequisites. These graduates have proven that mathematical genius can emerge from anywhere, from factory floors, from artists' studios, from kitchen tables where single mothers help their children with homework and accidentally revolutionize number theory. Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued. But this isn't just about mathematics. This is about creating a world where intelligence is recognized wherever it blooms, where curiosity is nurtured regardless of circumstances, where the cleaning lady's insights are valued as highly as the professor's. She gestured to the graduates sitting in the front rows, their faces glowing with pride and possibility. To our graduates, you are about to enter a world that may try to tell you that your unconventional path makes you less qualified, less credible, less worthy of recognition. Don't listen. Your perspectives are exactly what mathematics needs. Your questions, shaped by experiences outside traditional academia, will lead to answers that conventional thinkers might never find. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and new graduates posed for pictures, Maya found herself standing alone in the lobby, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Dr. Ripley approached her, carrying a small wrapped package. "Maya, I wanted to give this to you personally." Maya unwrapped the package to find a framed photograph, the original whiteboard from Professor Corleone's office covered with his crossed-out attempts at the Hartwell Conjecture. But in the corner, barely visible, was Maya's elegant solution written in her own handwriting, the moment she'd first dared to make her thinking visible. "I had Professor Corleone's permission to photograph this before they erased the board. I wanted you to have a reminder of the moment you chose to stop hiding." Maya's eyes filled with tears as she studied the image. There it was, the proof that had changed her life, written in her own hand on a whiteboard she'd cleaned hundreds of times. "Dr. Ripley," Maya said softly, "thank you for seeing me, even when it was hard. Thank you for refusing to stay invisible. You've made all of us better mathematicians by forcing us to examine our assumptions about where brilliance comes from." As the celebration continued around them, Maya stepped outside into the crisp evening air. She pulled out her phone and typed a text to Professor Corleone, who was inside enjoying the reception. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." His response came immediately. "Thank you for teaching me that the most important mathematical discoveries aren't found in textbooks. They're found in the courage to let the world see who you really are." Maya looked up at the bronze letters spelling out Washington Institute for Mathematical Innovation above the entrance. Tomorrow she would return here not as a custodian, but as Dr. Maya Washington, Director of Non-Traditional Mathematical Education. Tomorrow she would help other hidden geniuses find their voices. But tonight, Grandma, she just stood there in the gathering darkness, thinking about a woman who taught her that gifts weren't meant to be hidden, that brilliance belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it, and that the most beautiful mathematics in the world was the equation that connected one human heart to another. Maya whispered into the October night, "Thank you, Grandma, for teaching me to see the mathematics in every human story.
the beautiful equation that connects who we are to who we're meant to become. Grandma, that's Maya's story. A story about a woman who refused to let the world define her intelligence by her circumstances, who chose truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance. A story about the mathematics of the heart, the equation that transforms hidden gifts into world-changing discoveries when multiplied by courage and divided by fear. And maybe, just maybe, it's a story about all of us who carry brilliance in unexpected packages, waiting for the moment when we're finally brave enough to let the world see who we really are. The Hartwell Conjecture was just the beginning. Maya Washington's real masterpiece was proving that genius belongs to anyone bold enough to claim it. I love you, Grandma. Thank you for teaching me to see the mathematics in every human story, the beautiful equation that connects who we are to who we're meant to become. If this story touched anyone out there, if they've ever felt like Maya felt, hiding their light in the shadows, please share your story in the comments below. The world needs to hear it. The world needs to see you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us all that extraordinary lives are being lived by ordinary people in every corner of this beautiful, complicated world.